The roar of jet engines cuts through the morning air as an F-16 Fighting Falcon streaks across the Maryland sky, its pilot unaware that in mere minutes he will face a choice that will define not only his character, but the very future of American military security. Below, storm clouds gather with ominous intensity, and somewhere in the chaos of wind and rain, a life hangs in the balance. Captain James Mitchell has dedicated his entire existence to serving his country with honor and distinction. The son of a decorated Air Force colonel, he has never questioned the chain of command, never wavered in his loyalty, never imagined that doing the right thing could cost him everything he holds dear. But today, as nature unleashes its fury and fate presents him with an impossible decision, James will discover that true heroism sometimes requires breaking the very rules you've sworn to uphold. What happens when a split-second choice between saving a life and following orders sets in motion a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of military command? When the very institution you've served faithfully becomes the enemy you must defeat? When redemption can only be found by risking everything you've already lost? This is a story of courage tested in the crucible of betrayal, of honor preserved in the face of disgrace, and of one man's journey from decorated pilot to disgraced exile, to unlikely hero. It's a tale that will take you from the cockpit of a fighter jet to the shadowy world of espionage, from the depths of personal despair to the heights of patriotic service. Welcome to this incredible journey of sacrifice and redemption. We're thrilled to have you with us today, and we'd love to know where you're joining us from around the world. Drop a comment and let us know your location. Before we begin this gripping tale, we want to ask you, what do you think makes a true military hero? Is it unwavering obedience to orders, or the moral courage to do what's right, even when it costs everything? Share your thoughts below. Stories like these remind us why the men and women in uniform deserve our deepest respect and gratitude. Now prepare yourself for a story that will challenge everything you think you know about duty, honor, and the price of doing what's right. This is the story of Captain James Mitchell, and it begins with a storm that will change everything. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Andrews Air Force Base as Captain James Mitchell completed his pre-flight inspection of the F-16 Fighting Falcon. The sleek gray aircraft gleamed under the Maryland sky, its surface reflecting the dedication of countless hours spent in maintenance by Master Sergeant Carlos Rivera and his crew. James ran his hand along the fuselage, feeling the familiar texture of the composite materials that had become as familiar to him as his own skin over the past 8 years of service. "Beautiful morning for flying, Captain," Rivera called out, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag. The stocky mechanic's weathered face bore the satisfied expression of a craftsman who took pride in his work. "She's purring like a kitten, all systems green across the board." James nodded, his blue-gray eyes scanning the horizon where storm clouds gathered in the distance. "Thanks, Carlos. Weather Service says those storms might intensify, but we should be clear for the training exercise." The routine navigation and tactical training mission was scheduled to take him over the rural areas of southern Maryland, where the Air Force maintained several practice ranges. It was the kind of flight James had completed hundreds of times before, yet he never lost the sense of anticipation that came with strapping himself into $30 million worth of cutting-edge military technology. As he climbed into the cockpit, James caught sight of the small photograph tucked into the corner of his instrument panel. His father, Colonel Michael Mitchell, stood proudly beside his own F-16 25 years earlier, wearing the same confident smile that James had inherited. The elder Mitchell had died in a mission over Afghanistan when James was 17, leaving behind a legacy of service and an unwavering moral compass that had guided his son through every decision since. "Tower, this is Falcon 27 requesting clearance for departure," James spoke into his radio as he completed the final system checks. "Falcon 27, you are cleared for takeoff. Proceed to training area Bravo 7 as briefed. Be advised, weather conditions are deteriorating in your operational area." The F-16 roared to life beneath him, and James felt the familiar surge of power as he guided the aircraft down the runway. Within seconds, he was airborne, climbing steadily into the gray morning sky. Below him, the familiar landscape of the Washington metropolitan area spread out like a detailed map, with the Potomac River winding its way toward the distant Chesapeake Bay. 30 minutes into the flight, James was conducting low-level navigation exercises over the sparsely populated farmland of Charles County when the storm system moved in faster than predicted. Rain began pelting his canopy as he banked the aircraft through a series of tactical maneuvers, his hands moving with practiced precision across the controls. It was then that he saw her. Through the rain-streaked canopy, a small figure was visible in what appeared to be a dried creek bed that had suddenly become a raging torrent. The woman was trapped on a small island of higher ground, surrounded by rapidly rising floodwater that carried debris from upstream farms. Even from his altitude of 500 feet, James could see that she was in immediate danger. "Tower, this is Falcon 27. I have a visual on what appears to be a civilian in distress in the flood zone. Grid reference." James quickly calculated his position and relayed the coordinates. "Falcon 27, maintain your current flight path. Emergency services have been notified and are en route to the area." James banked the aircraft for a closer look, his training warring with his instincts. The woman below was waving frantically, and the water level was rising visibly with each passing minute. Emergency services would take at least 20 minutes to reach this remote location, and by then it would be too late. "Tower, the situation is critical. The victim will not survive until ground rescue arrives." "Falcon 27, you are ordered to maintain flight operations and clear the area immediately. Do not deviate from your assigned mission." James stared down at the figure below, his father's voice echoing in his memory from countless childhood conversations about duty, honor, and the responsibility that came with wearing the uniform. "Son," his father had once told him, "there will come moments in your life when you have to choose between following orders and following your conscience. Those are the moments that define who you really are." The woman below stumbled and nearly fell into the churning water. "Tower, I am declaring an emergency and executing an immediate landing to assist the civilian." "Falcon 27, you are ordered to abort that action immediately. You do not have authorization for emergency landing procedures." James was already lining up his approach, his years of training taking over, as he identified a stretch of relatively flat farmland adjacent to the flood zone. Landing an F-16 on unprepared terrain was dangerous under the best of conditions, and these were far from ideal. The rain had made the ground soft and unpredictable, and there were power lines and farm buildings to navigate around. "I'm sorry, Tower, but I cannot comply with that order." The landing was harrowing. James felt every bump and irregularity in the terrain as the aircraft touched down, its landing gear straining against the uneven surface. He managed to bring the F-16 to a stop less than 50 yards from where the woman was trapped, the jet's engines winding down as he quickly shut down all systems. Without hesitation, James popped the canopy and climbed out, still wearing his flight suit and helmet. The rain immediately soaked through his gear as he assessed the situation. The woman appeared to be in her late 30s, with dark hair plastered to her head by the rain. Her clothes were torn and muddy, suggesting she had been struggling against the flood for some time. "Hold on," James called out, as he waded into the chest-deep water, fighting against the current that threatened to sweep him downstream. The cold water was a shock to his system, but his focus remained entirely on reaching the stranded woman. When he finally reached her, she looked up at him with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "You landed that plane to help me?" she gasped, her voice barely audible over the roar of the rushing water. "Yes, ma'am. We need to get you out of here right now." The rescue took nearly 15 minutes of careful maneuvering through the treacherous current. James used techniques from his survival training to guide them both to safety, his physical conditioning allowing him to maintain his strength against the relentless pull of the floodwater. When they finally reached solid ground, both were exhausted and shivering from the cold. "Thank you," the woman said, her dark eyes meeting his with an intensity that seemed to convey more than simple gratitude. "You saved my life." Before James could respond, the sound of approaching helicopters filled the air. Military police vehicles were already visible in the distance, racing across the farmland toward his position. The reality of what he had done began to sink in as he looked back at his F-16, sitting incongruously in the middle of a Maryland cornfield. "Captain Mitchell," the lead military police officer announced as he approached with his weapon drawn, "you are under arrest for violation of direct orders and unauthorized use of military equipment. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, James caught one last glimpse of the woman he had rescued. She was being led away by paramedics, but she turned back to look at him with an expression he could not quite read. In that moment, Despite everything that was about to happen to his career and his life, James Mitchell knew he had made the right choice. The storm continued to rage around them as they loaded him into the military police vehicle, but James felt a strange sense of peace. His father would have been proud. The fluorescent lights of the courtroom at Andrews Air Force Base cast harsh shadows across the polished wooden surfaces as Captain James Mitchell stood at attention before the military tribunal. 2 weeks had passed since the incident, 2 weeks of confinement to quarters, endless interrogations, and the gradual realization that his military career was effectively over. The dress blue uniform he wore felt heavier than usual, weighed down by the knowledge that this would likely be the last time he would wear it with honor. Colonel Richard Stone presided over the proceedings from the center of the three-judge panel, his steel-gray hair perfectly groomed, and his uniform adorned with ribbons that spoke of a distinguished career. At 48, Stone had the bearing of a man accustomed to command, but there was something in his pale blue eyes that James found unsettling, a hardness that seemed to go beyond military discipline. What James could not know was that Colonel Stone was fighting battles on multiple fronts. 3 months earlier, Stone had received a visit from Vincent Kozlov, a man whose expensive suit could not quite hide the predatory nature beneath. Kozlov represented certain interests in Eastern Europe, and he had made it clear that Stone's gambling debts had reached a level that required immediate attention. $2.3 million, Colonel, Kozlov had said in his accented English, placing photographs on Stone's desk. Pictures of Stone at underground poker games in Atlantic City, signing markers he could never hope to repay on a military salary. This is a substantial sum, but we are reasonable people. We understand that a man in your position has access to certain information that might be valuable to our associates. Stone had tried to refuse initially, but Kozlov had simply smiled and produced another set of photographs. These showed Stone's daughter Sarah at her college campus, walking to class completely unaware that she was being watched. The message had been unmistakably clear. Now as Stone looked down at Captain Mitchell, he saw an opportunity to demonstrate his reliability to his new masters. The case was perfect, a clear violation of orders that could be prosecuted to the fullest extent, showing that Stone could be trusted to put their interests above military loyalty when necessary. Captain Mitchell, Stone began, his voice carrying the weight of military authority. You stand accused of willful disobedience of a direct order, unauthorized use of military aircraft, and reckless endangerment of government property valued at $30 million. How do you plead? James stood straighter, his jaw set with determination. Not guilty, sir. A murmur rippled through the courtroom gallery, where fellow officers and airmen had gathered to witness the proceedings. Master Sergeant Carlos Rivera sat in the front row, his weathered face etched with concern for his friend. Behind him, other members of James's squadron watched with a mixture of sympathy and unease, knowing that any one of them could find themselves in a similar position if they ever faced the choice between orders and conscience. The prosecution, led by Major Patricia Hendricks, presented their case with clinical efficiency. Radio transcripts clearly showed James receiving direct orders to maintain his flight path and his deliberate refusal to comply. Maintenance records detailed the damage to the F-16's landing gear from the unauthorized landing on unprepared terrain. Weather reports confirmed that emergency services were en route and would have reached the victim within an acceptable time frame. The defendant's actions, while perhaps well-intentioned, represent a fundamental breakdown in military discipline, Major Hendricks argued. If every service member felt free to ignore direct orders based on their personal judgment, the entire command structure would collapse. Captain Mitchell's decision endangered not only a $30 million aircraft, but also his own life and potentially the lives of others. When it came time for James to present his defense, he stood and faced the tribunal with the same steady composure he had shown in the cockpit of his F-16. His military attorney, Captain David Park, had advised him to show remorse and request leniency, but James knew that would be a betrayal of everything his father had taught him. Sirs, I do not dispute the facts as presented by the prosecution. I did disobey a direct order. I did use military equipment in an unauthorized manner, but I would submit to this tribunal that there are times when our duty as human beings supersedes our duty as soldiers. Colonel Stone leaned forward, his expression stern. Captain, are you suggesting that military orders are optional when they conflict with your personal beliefs? No, sir. I am suggesting that when faced with a choice between following orders and saving a human life, the moral choice is clear. The woman I rescued would have died if I had followed those orders. No aircraft, no matter how expensive, is worth more than a human life. James paused, his thoughts turning to the photograph in his cockpit, to the values his father had instilled in him through years of quiet example. My father, Colonel Michael Mitchell, served in this same uniform for 22 years. He taught me that our oath is not just to follow orders, but to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That Constitution speaks of the unalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. How can I defend those principles if I am unwilling to act on them when it matters most? The courtroom was silent as James continued. I understand the importance of military discipline. I understand that my actions set a precedent that could be problematic if misapplied. But I also understand that there are moments in every person's life when they must choose who they want to be. I chose to be someone who saves lives, rather than someone who follows orders blindly. Colonel Stone's expression remained impassive, but internally he was calculating. Kozlov had made it clear that any demonstration of Stone's willingness to prioritize their agenda would be rewarded, and conversely, any sign of weakness or sentimentality would have consequences. The colonel thought of his daughter Sarah, of the photographs that served as a constant reminder of what was at stake. Captain Mitchell, Stone said, his voice carrying a note of finality, your words are eloquent, but they cannot change the fundamental facts of this case. Military discipline is not a suggestion or a guideline. It is the foundation upon which our entire defense structure rests. Your actions, regardless of their humanitarian motivation, represent a clear violation of that discipline. The deliberation took less than an hour. When the tribunal reconvened, Colonel Stone stood to deliver the verdict with the bearing of a man performing an unpleasant but necessary duty. Captain James Mitchell, this tribunal finds you guilty on all charges. You are hereby sentenced to dismissal from the United States Air Force with a discharge under other than honorable conditions. You will forfeit all pay and allowances, and you are stripped of all rank and privileges. The words hit James like physical blows, but he maintained his composure as the ceremonial aspects of his disgrace unfolded. The silver captain's bars were removed from his uniform, followed by his pilot's wings, the symbol he had worked so hard to earn and had worn with such pride. Each item was placed on the table before the tribunal with deliberate ceremony, the metallic sounds echoing in the silent courtroom. Master Sergeant Rivera watched with tears in his eyes as his friend was systematically stripped of everything that had defined his professional identity. Other members of the squadron shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some questioning whether they would have had the courage to make the same choice James had made. As the proceedings concluded, James was escorted from the courtroom by military police. In the hallway, he was briefly allowed to say goodbye to his fellow airmen. Rivera approached first, his voice thick with emotion. Jimmy, this is wrong. What you did out there, that took real courage. Take care of yourself, Carlos, James replied, embracing his friend. And take care of the others. They're going to need good people like you to remind them what we're really fighting for. One by one, other members of his squadron approached to offer words of support and encouragement. Some shook his hand, others simply nodded with respect, but all of them understood that they were witnessing the end of a career that had been built on honor and principle. As James walked out of Andrews Air Force Base for the final time, still wearing his uniform but stripped of all rank and insignia, he carried with him the weight of his decision and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The storm that had brought him to this moment had passed, but he knew that darker clouds were gathering on the horizon of his life. Behind him, Colonel Stone watched from his office window as the man he had just destroyed disappeared into civilian life. Stone's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Well done. First payment has been deposited. The colonel closed his eyes and tried not to think about what other prices he might be asked to pay in the future. The small apartment in Alexandria, Virginia, felt like a prison cell compared to the spacious quarters James had enjoyed at Andrews Air Force Base. The one-bedroom unit on the third floor of a converted townhouse was all he could afford with his rapidly dwindling savings, and even that was stretching his budget to the breaking point. 3 months had passed since his dismissal from the Air Force. 3 months of rejection letters, closed doors, and the gradual erosion of everything he had once believed about his place in the world. James sat at the small kitchen table, staring at yet another rejection email on his laptop screen. The position had been for a commercial pilot with a regional airline, a job that should have been well within his qualifications. His flight hours were impeccable. his safety record spotless, and his technical knowledge superior to most civilian pilots. But the email was polite and brief. While your qualifications are impressive, we have decided to pursue other candidates whose backgrounds are more aligned with our company's needs. It was the same message he had received from 17 other airlines, 12 private aviation companies, and even 3 flight instruction schools. The phrase "other than honorable discharge" might as well have been a scarlet letter branded across his forehead. In the aviation industry, where safety and reliability were paramount, his military record was seen as a liability rather than an asset. The irony was not lost on him. He had been dismissed for saving a life, for choosing human compassion over blind obedience, yet the civilian world viewed this as evidence of poor judgment and unreliability. The very qualities that had made him an exceptional military pilot, his moral courage and willingness to take calculated risks, were now the barriers preventing him from finding work. James closed the laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the busy street below. Alexandria's Old Town bustled with activity as federal employees made their way to work in nearby Washington, D.C. Many of them were probably heading to the Pentagon, the building where he had once dreamed of serving in some capacity. Now that world felt as distant as another planet. The financial pressure was becoming unbearable. His savings account, once healthy from years of military pay with minimal expenses, was down to less than $800. Rent was due in 5 days, and he had no prospects for income. The unemployment benefits he received were barely enough to cover basic necessities, and his pride prevented him from asking for help from former colleagues who were still serving. On the coffee table sat a stack of bills that seemed to grow larger each day. Credit card statements, utility bills, and medical expenses from a minor injury he had sustained during his arrest were all demanding payment he could not provide. The stress was taking its toll on his physical health as well. He had lost 15 pounds and was sleeping poorly, often waking in the middle of the night with anxiety attacks that left him gasping for breath. The worst part was the isolation. Military life had provided him with a built-in community, a brotherhood of shared purpose and mutual support. Now he spent most days alone in the apartment, sending out resumes and applications that disappeared into the digital void without acknowledgement. The few friends he had maintained contact with were still active duty, and their conversations inevitably became awkward when the topic of his current situation arose. James picked up the photograph of his father that he had placed on the mantelpiece, the same image that had once been tucked into his F-16's instrument panel. Colonel Michael Mitchell smiled back at him from the frame, wearing his flight suit and standing beside his aircraft with the confidence of a man who knew his place in the world. James wondered what his father would think of his current situation, whether the old man would still be proud of the choice his son had made. "What would you do now, Dad?" James whispered to the photograph. "How do you rebuild your life when everything you trained for, everything you believed in, is suddenly worthless?" The memories came flooding back, as they often did during these moments of despair. He remembered being 12 years old, sitting in his father's study while the colonel worked on flight plans and mission reports. His father had looked up from his paperwork and said, "Son, there are going to be times in your life when doing the right thing costs you everything. Those are the times when you find out what you're really made of." At the time, James had nodded solemnly, without fully understanding what his father meant. Now, living the reality of those words, he was beginning to comprehend the true weight of moral courage. It was easy to do the right thing when it cost nothing. It was infinitely harder when the price was everything you had worked to achieve. A knock at the door interrupted his brooding. James was not expecting anyone, and his first thought was that it might be his landlord coming to discuss the upcoming rent payment. He opened the door to find Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who lived in the apartment below his. She was holding a covered dish and wearing the concerned expression of someone who had been watching her neighbor's decline with growing worry. "James, dear, I made too much soup again," she said, though they both knew this was a gentle fiction. "Would you mind helping me finish it?" Mrs. Chen had been performing these small acts of kindness for the past month, always framing them as favors she needed rather than charity she was offering. James was grateful for her tact, even as he struggled with accepting help from someone who was living on a fixed income herself. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Chen. Please come in." As they shared the homemade soup at his small kitchen table, Mrs. Chen spoke about her late husband, who had served in the Navy during the Korean War. "He used to tell me that the hardest battles weren't fought against the enemy," she said quietly. They were fought against despair, against the temptation to give up when everything seemed hopeless. James nodded, understanding that she was offering more than just soup. How did he get through it? One day at a time, she replied. And by remembering that even when we can't see the purpose in our suffering, it's preparing us for something we can't yet imagine. After Mrs. Chen left, James found himself thinking about her words as he prepared for another sleepless night. He had been so focused on what he had lost that he had not considered what he might be gaining. The experience of hitting rock bottom was teaching him things about resilience and humility that he never could have learned in the structured environment of military life. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the city outside his window, James made a decision. Tomorrow he would stop looking backward at what he had lost and start looking forward to what he might become. He did not know what form that future would take, but he knew that his father had not raised him to be a quitter. The leather jacket hanging in his closet caught his eye in the dim light filtering through the window. It was his father's old flight jacket, worn and weathered from years of service. James had almost sold it the week before, desperate for money to pay his bills, but something had stopped him at the last moment. Now he understood why. It was not just a piece of clothing. It was a reminder of the values that had shaped him, values that no court-martial or discharge papers could take away. Outside, a military transport plane flew overhead, its lights blinking as it made its approach to Andrews Air Force Base. James watched it disappear into the darkness and felt something he had not experienced in months: hope. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew he would face it with the same courage that had led him to land his F-16 in a Maryland cornfield to save a stranger's life. That courage, he was beginning to realize, was the one thing they could never take away from him. The small cafe in Old Town Alexandria was nearly empty at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, with only a few laptop-wielding students and remote workers scattered among the mismatched tables and chairs. James Mitchell sat in a corner booth, nursing his second cup of coffee and pretending to read a newspaper while his mind wandered through the familiar maze of job applications and rejection letters. 4 months had passed since his dismissal from the Air Force, and the weight of his circumstances had settled into a dull, persistent ache that colored every aspect of his daily existence. He was about to leave when she walked in. James recognized her immediately, despite the dramatic change in her appearance. The woman he had pulled from the floodwaters in Maryland now wore an elegant navy blue business suit, her dark hair styled professionally, and her bearing confident and purposeful. Gone was the desperate, mud-covered victim he remembered. In her place stood someone who looked like she belonged in the corridors of power in nearby Washington, D.C. Their eyes met across the cafe, and she approached his table with a slight smile that seemed to carry both gratitude and something else he could not quite identify. "Captain Mitchell," she said, extending her hand. "I was hoping I might find you here. I'm Emma Rodriguez." "It's just James now," he replied, standing to shake her hand. "I'm no longer a captain of anything." "May I sit?" she asked, and when he nodded, she slid into the booth across from him. Up close, he could see that her dark eyes held an intelligence and intensity that seemed at odds with the helpless woman he remembered from that stormy morning. "I've been wanting to thank you properly for what you did," Emma began, her voice carrying a slight accent that suggested Hispanic heritage. "What you sacrificed to save my life. I know what it cost you." James shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. Anyone would have done the same thing. "No," Emma said firmly. "They wouldn't have. And that's exactly why I need to talk to you." She glanced around the cafe, ensuring they were not being overheard. "James, there are things about that day, about who I am and why I was there, that you need to know." Something in her tone made James lean forward, his attention fully focused on her words. "What kind of things?" Emma reached into her purse and withdrew a leather credential case, sliding it across the table. James opened it to find a Central Intelligence Agency identification card bearing Emma's photograph and the name Emma Rodriguez, Senior Intelligence Analyst. "You're CIA," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was conducting surveillance on suspected terrorist activities in the area when the flash flood caught me," Emma explained. "I had been tracking a cell that we believed was planning attacks on military installations. What I discovered was much worse than we initially thought." She paused, studying James's face carefully before continuing. 3 weeks before you rescued me, Brigadier General Patricia Hawkins was killed in what appeared to be a car accident outside Fort Belvoir. The official investigation concluded it was driver error, but General Hawkins had been investigating irregularities in security protocols at several Air Force bases. She had discovered evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military command. James felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of conspiracy? We call it Broken Eagle, Emma said, her voice dropping even lower. A network of military officers, defense contractors, and foreign operatives working together to compromise American military security. General Hawkins was getting close to exposing them when she died. Emma reached into her purse again and withdrew a manila envelope. I've been working with a small group of loyal CIA officers to continue her investigation. What we've discovered is that the conspiracy is planning something catastrophic for the 4th of July. James opened the envelope to find photographs of military personnel, including several faces he recognized from Andrews Air Force Base. His blood ran cold when he saw Colonel Richard Stone prominently featured in several images, meeting with men in expensive suits whose faces were partially obscured. Stone, James breathed. He was the one who pushed hardest for my court-martial. That's not a coincidence, Emma said. Colonel Stone has been compromised for months. We have evidence that he's been feeding information to the conspiracy in exchange for money to cover massive gambling debts. Your rescue of me interfered with a planned operation in that area, and your subsequent court-martial served 2 purposes. It removed a potential witness and demonstrated Stone's loyalty to his new masters. James studied the photographs more carefully, noting the timestamps and locations. How do I know you're telling me the truth? How do I know this isn't some elaborate setup? Emma smiled grimly. Because in about 5 minutes, Director William Hayes is going to walk through that door and explain exactly how real this threat is. As if summoned by her words, a tall man in his early 60s entered the cafe. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, and his dark suit spoke of government authority. He moved with the measured pace of someone accustomed to command, his grey eyes scanning the room before settling on their table. James Mitchell, Director Hayes said as he approached, extending his hand. I've heard a great deal about you, all of it impressive. Hayes slid into the booth beside Emma, his presence immediately making the small space feel more crowded and significant. Agent Rodriguez has been operating under my direct authority since General Hawkins's death. What she's told you is accurate, and the threat is imminent. Why are you telling me this? James asked. I'm a disgraced ex-pilot with no security clearance and no official standing. Because you're exactly what we need, Hayes replied. Someone with intimate knowledge of Air Force operations and security protocols, someone who has already proven he's willing to sacrifice everything for what's right, and someone who officially doesn't exist in our system anymore. Emma leaned forward, her expression intense. The conspiracy is planning coordinated attacks on 5 major military installations during 4th of July celebrations. Thousands of military personnel and their families will be at risk. The main target is the Pentagon itself. Hayes opened his own briefcase and withdrew a tablet computer, showing James satellite imagery and intelligence reports. They're planning to use a modified civilian aircraft, loaded with explosives to strike the Pentagon during the Independence Day ceremony. The attack is designed to look like foreign terrorism, but it's actually domestic betrayal of the worst kind. James studied the intelligence reports, his military training allowing him to quickly understand the tactical implications of what he was seeing. The security protocols for the 4th of July celebration, they would need inside information to bypass them. Exactly, Emma said. And Colonel Stone is in a position to provide that information. We estimate they have less than 3 weeks to execute their plan. What do you want from me? James asked, though he was beginning to understand the answer. Director Hayes closed the tablet and looked directly into James's eyes. We want you to help us stop them. Your knowledge of Air Force operations and your personal motivation make you uniquely qualified for this mission. James thought about his father's photograph sitting on his mantelpiece, about the values that had led him to sacrifice his career for a stranger's life. If I agree to help, what happens afterward? I'm still a civilian with a dishonorable discharge. If we succeed, Hayes said quietly, there will be ways to address the injustices that have been done to you. But I won't lie, this operation is off the books. If something goes wrong, we can't protect you. Emma reached across the table and placed her hand over James's. I know what I'm asking of you. You've already lost everything once for doing the right thing. But if we don't stop this, Thousands of innocent people will die, and the very foundations of our military will be compromised. James looked around the cafe, at the ordinary people living their ordinary lives, completely unaware that their safety hung in the balance. He thought about Mrs. Chen and her simple kindness, about the students typing on their laptops, about all the people who trusted that someone was watching over them. "When do we start?" he asked. Emma smiled for the first time since entering the cafe, and James saw in her expression the same determination that had driven him to land his F-16 in a cornfield. "We start now. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe. The people we're hunting have already killed a general. They won't hesitate to eliminate anyone else who threatens their plans." As they prepared to leave the cafe, James felt something he had not experienced in months: purpose. The path ahead was dangerous and uncertain, but for the first time since his court-martial, he was exactly where he belonged. The safe house in Georgetown was a nondescript townhouse that blended seamlessly into the upscale neighborhood, its brick facade and manicured garden offering no hint of the high-level intelligence operations conducted within its walls. James followed Emma through a series of security checkpoints, each more sophisticated than the last, until they reached a basement command center that rivaled anything he had seen during his military service. Director Hayes was waiting for them, along with two other individuals James had not met. The first was a woman in her 40s with short auburn hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. The second was a younger man, whose casual attire could not disguise the alertness in his dark eyes. "James, meet Agent Sarah Chen, our operations coordinator, and Marcus Webb, our technical specialist," Hayes said. "They've been working on the Broken Eagle investigation since the beginning." Agent Chen stepped forward, extending her hand. "We've heard about your background, Captain. Your tactical knowledge is going to be invaluable in understanding how they plan to execute these attacks." Over the next 2 hours, the team briefed James on the full scope of what they had discovered. The conspiracy was far more extensive than he had initially realized, involving not just military personnel, but also defense contractors, foreign intelligence operatives, and even some members of Congress who had been compromised through various means. "The financial trail leads back to a consortium of Eastern European interests," Marcus explained, pointing to a complex diagram displayed on multiple monitors. "They've been systematically identifying and exploiting vulnerabilities in our military leadership for the past 3 years. Emma pulled up a series of surveillance photographs on her tablet. Colonel Stone was one of their early targets. His gambling addiction made him vulnerable, but they were patient. They let his debts accumulate to over $2 million before making their move." James studied the images, which showed Stone at various underground poker games in Atlantic City and Washington, D.C. In several photos, he was clearly intoxicated, signing what appeared to be promissory notes with amounts that would have been impossible for him to repay on his military salary. 3 months ago, they made their approach, Agent Chen continued. "A man named Vincent Kozlov, who represents certain interests that we're still trying to identify. He offered Stone a way out of his debts in exchange for information." "What kind of information?" James asked. "Initially just routine intelligence about base security protocols and personnel movements," Hayes replied. "Nothing that seemed immediately threatening, but once they had him compromised, they began asking for more sensitive material." Marcus brought up another set of documents on the main screen. 2 weeks ago, Stone provided them with detailed security plans for the 4th of July celebration at the Pentagon, guard rotations, access protocols, even the flight paths for the ceremonial flyover. James felt his stomach tighten as he realized the implications. With that information, they could time their attack to maximize casualties and minimize the chance of interception. "Exactly," Emma said, "but there's more. We've identified 4 other military officers who have been similarly compromised. Together, they have access to security information for Andrews Air Force Base, Norfolk Naval Station, Fort Bragg, and Peterson Space Force Base." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. James had served in an environment where loyalty and honor were considered absolute values, where the idea of betraying one's country for money was almost incomprehensible. Yet here was evidence of systematic corruption that reached into the highest levels of military command. "How did you discover all this?" James asked. General Hawkins was investigating irregularities in classified information handling when she stumbled onto the conspiracy, Agent Chen explained. She had identified several instances where sensitive intelligence had been accessed without proper authorization. When she began connecting the dots, She realized the pattern suggested a coordinated effort. Emma's expression darkened. She was scheduled to brief the Secretary of Defense the day after her accident. We believe they killed her to prevent that briefing from taking place. James studied the timeline displayed on one of the monitors, noting how events had accelerated after General Hawkins's death. They're moving faster now because they know they're being investigated. That's our assessment as well, Hayes confirmed, which is why we need to act quickly. We estimate they'll execute their plan during the Pentagon's Independence Day ceremony, which gives us less than 2 weeks. Marcus pulled up architectural plans of the Pentagon and surrounding airspace. The ceremony is scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon. There will be approximately 3,000 military personnel and family members in attendance, including the Secretary of Defense and several members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The perfect target, James murmured, his tactical mind automatically analyzing the vulnerabilities. Maximum symbolic impact, maximum casualties, and the elimination of key military leadership. We've identified the aircraft they plan to use, Emma said, bringing up surveillance footage of a private airfield in rural Virginia. It's a modified Cessna Citation, registered to a shell company that traces back to the same Eastern European consortium. They've been making modifications to increase its fuel capacity and payload. James watched the footage, noting the unusual activity around the aircraft. Those modifications would allow them to carry a significant amount of explosives while maintaining enough fuel for a one-way trip to Washington. The plan is elegant in its simplicity, Agent Chen observed grimly. A single aircraft, approaching from an unexpected vector, with inside information about security protocols and timing. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, it will be too late to stop. Hayes leaned back in his chair, his expression grave. The official channels are compromised. We don't know how many people in the Pentagon or CIA might be working with them, so we can't risk going through normal procedures. What about the FBI? James asked. We've identified at least 2 Bureau personnel who have had suspicious contact with known associates of the conspiracy, Marcus replied. We can't trust anyone outside this room. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming. A small group of intelligence operatives and 1 disgraced ex-pilot were the only thing standing between the conspiracy and a catastrophic attack that would reshape American military leadership. So what's the plan? James asked. Emma looked at Hayes, who nodded slightly before responding. We're going to infiltrate their operation, get close enough to gather the evidence we need to expose the entire network and prevent the attack. How? You're going to approach Colonel Stone, Agent Chen said. Tell him you're desperate, that you need money, that you're willing to provide information about Air Force security procedures in exchange for cash. James felt a chill run through him. You want me to pretend to be a traitor? We want you to get close enough to Stone to learn the details of their plan, Hayes clarified. Once we know exactly how and when they intend to strike, we can take appropriate action. It's dangerous, Emma admitted. If they suspect you're working with us, they won't hesitate to eliminate you. But your background makes you the perfect candidate. A disgraced officer with financial problems and a grudge against the military would be exactly the kind of person they'd want to recruit. James thought about his father's photograph, about the values that had guided his entire life. The idea of pretending to betray everything he believed in was almost physically painful, but he understood the necessity. When do we start? He asked. Tomorrow, Hayes replied. Stone frequents a bar in Arlington where several military contractors conduct informal business. We'll arrange for you to encounter him there. Make it seem accidental. As the briefing concluded and the team began to disperse, Emma approached James privately. I know what we're asking of you, she said quietly. Pretending to be something you're not, especially something you despise, is going to be one of the hardest things you've ever done. I've already lost everything once for doing what I thought was right, James replied. If this is what it takes to prevent thousands of innocent people from dying, then it's what I'll do. Emma nodded, her respect for him evident in her expression. Your father would be proud of you. As James prepared to leave the safe house, he realized that his life had taken another dramatic turn. 4 months ago, he had been a decorated Air Force pilot. Now he was about to become a spy, infiltrating a conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of American military security. The path ahead was treacherous and uncertain, but for the first time since his court-martial, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The secure conference room at CIA headquarters in Langley was windowless and sterile, its white walls lined with monitors, displaying classified intelligence that would never see the light of day. James sat at the polished mahogany table, still processing the events of the past week. His infiltration of Colonel Stone's network had been more successful than anyone had dared hope, but the intelligence he had gathered painted a picture of betrayal so comprehensive that it challenged everything he thought he knew about military loyalty. Director Hayes entered the room followed by Major Lisa Chen of Military Intelligence, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s whose reputation for analytical brilliance was matched only by her unwavering dedication to national security. Behind them came Agent Rodriguez, carrying a thick folder that James knew contained the evidence that would either save thousands of lives or condemn them all to failure. "Major Chen, thank you for coming," Hayes said as they took their seats. "What James has discovered requires immediate coordination between our agencies." Major Chen studied James with professional interest. "Director Hayes has briefed me on your background, Mr. Mitchell. Your sacrifice and subsequent assistance in this investigation are remarkable." James nodded acknowledgement but remained focused on the task at hand. "Ma'am, what I learned from Colonel Stone goes beyond anything we initially suspected. The attack on the Pentagon is just the beginning." Emma opened her folder and spread surveillance photographs across the table. James was able to get close enough to Stone to learn the full scope of Operation Broken Eagle. They're planning simultaneous attacks on 5 military installations during Independence Day celebrations. 5? Major Chen leaned forward, her expression grave. "The Pentagon is the primary target," James explained, pointing to a detailed map. "But they also plan to strike Andrews Air Force Base during the air show, Norfolk Naval Station during the Fleet Review, Fort Bragg during the family picnic, and Peterson Space Force Base during the open house." Hayes pulled up additional intelligence on the wall monitors. "The coordination required for this operation suggests months of planning and significant financial backing. We're looking at a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of military command." James thought back to his meeting with Stone 3 days earlier. The colonel had been drunk and desperate, his gambling debts having grown even larger despite the payments he had received for his betrayal. In his intoxicated state, Stone had revealed details that a sober man would never have shared. "Stone is being blackmailed," James continued. "They have photographs of his daughter at college, surveillance footage of his wife at work. He's not just motivated by money anymore, he's terrified for his family's safety." Major Chen made notes on her tablet. "That explains why he's been so cooperative with their demands. Fear is often a more powerful motivator than greed." Emma brought up technical specifications on one of the monitors. "The primary attack will use a modified Cessna Citation loaded with military-grade explosives." James was able to confirm that they've stolen ordnance from a depot in West Virginia. "How much ordnance?" Hayes asked. "Enough to level half the Pentagon," James replied grimly. "The aircraft has been modified to carry maximum payload with just enough fuel for a one-way trip from their staging area in rural Virginia." Major Chen studied the flight path projections displayed on the screen. "The timing is crucial. They plan to strike during the ceremony when the Secretary of Defense and Joint Chiefs are all present. Eliminating the entire military leadership structure in one coordinated attack," Hayes observed. "The psychological impact alone would be devastating." James had spent sleepless nights thinking about the implications of what they had discovered. "There's something else." Stone mentioned that they have assets inside the Secret Service and air traffic control. The attack aircraft will be able to approach Washington airspace without triggering normal security protocols. The room fell silent as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. This was not simply a terrorist attack, it was a carefully orchestrated attempt to decapitate American military leadership and create chaos that could be exploited by foreign adversaries. "We need to consider our options," Major Chen said finally. "Normal procedures would require briefing the Secretary of Defense and requesting military intervention." "Normal procedures are compromised," Emma replied. "We don't know how many people in the Pentagon might be working with the conspiracy. Any official action could tip them off and cause them to accelerate their timeline." Hayes leaned back in his chair, the weight of command evident in his expression. "We need a solution that doesn't rely on official channels, something that can't be compromised by inside information." James had been thinking about this problem for days, using his military training to analyze the tactical situation. "There's one option that might work, but it would require unofficial cooperation from elements of the Air Force." "What do you have in mind?" Major Chen asked. "We need to intercept the attack aircraft before it reaches Washington airspace," James explained. "But we can't use official military assets because that would require going through compromised command structures. Emma understood immediately. You're talking about using civilian aircraft. Modified civilian aircraft, James clarified. There are several decommissioned F-16s that have been converted for civilian use. With the right modifications and pilot, one of those aircraft could intercept the attack plane. Hayes studied the tactical projections on the monitor. You're talking about an aerial engagement over populated areas. The risks are enormous. The risks of doing nothing are worse, James replied. If that attack aircraft reaches the Pentagon, thousands of people will die, and our military leadership will be eliminated. Major Chen was already running calculations on her tablet. The logistics are complex, but theoretically possible. We would need to coordinate with loyal elements in air traffic control to create a window of opportunity. I have contacts in the Air Force who can be trusted, James said. People who know me personally and would understand the necessity of unofficial action. Emma looked at Hayes, who was clearly wrestling with the decision. Sir, James is right. Official channels are too compromised. This may be our only option. And who would pilot this civilian interceptor? Hayes asked, though James suspected he already knew the answer. I would, James said simply. I know the aircraft, I understand the tactical situation, and I have the most to gain from stopping this attack. Major Chen studied James carefully. You realize that if this operation fails, you'll be blamed for everything. There will be no official recognition, no protection from prosecution. I understand, James replied. But if we succeed, we save thousands of lives and expose a conspiracy that threatens our national security. Hayes stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Virginia countryside where somewhere conspirators were preparing to strike at the heart of American military power. How long do we have? 6 days, Emma answered. The attack is scheduled for the afternoon of July 4th. Then we don't have time for extended deliberation, Hayes decided. James, can you contact your Air Force sources without alerting the conspiracy? Yes, sir. Master Sergeant Rivera at Andrews can be trusted completely. He has access to the aircraft and personnel we would need. Do it, Hayes ordered. But remember, this operation doesn't exist. If anyone asks, we never had this conversation. As the meeting concluded, and they began to plan the details of their unofficial operation, James felt the familiar surge of purpose that had once driven him to excel as a military pilot. The path ahead was dangerous and uncertain, but for the first time since his court-martial, he was being asked to use his skills in service of something greater than himself. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but James had learned something important during his months of exile and despair. Sometimes the most important battles were fought not in official uniforms, but in the shadows where ordinary people made extraordinary sacrifices to protect the innocent. His father would have understood. The modified F-16 sat on the tarmac of a private airfield in rural Maryland, its civilian registration numbers a stark contrast to the military markings James had grown accustomed to during his years of service. Master Sergeant Carlos Rivera had worked through the night to prepare the aircraft, installing additional communication equipment and ensuring that every system was operating at peak efficiency. The plane was officially registered as a civilian aerobatic aircraft, but Rivera's modifications had restored much of its original interceptor capability. She's ready, Jimmy, Rivera said, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag as James completed his pre-flight inspection. All systems are green and I've loaded the non-lethal interceptor package you requested. James nodded, running his hand along the aircraft's fuselage. The plan was to force the terrorist aircraft down rather than destroy it, preserving evidence of the conspiracy while minimizing the risk to civilians on the ground. The modified F-16 carried specialized equipment designed to disable aircraft electronics and force emergency landings. Emma's voice crackled through his headset from the mobile command center they had established in a converted trailer at the edge of the airfield. James, we have confirmation that the target aircraft has taken off from the staging area in Virginia. Estimated time to Washington airspace is 47 minutes. Director Hayes stood beside Emma in the command center, monitoring communications from loyal air traffic control personnel who had agreed to create a temporary gap in radar coverage. The operation required split-second timing and absolute coordination between multiple agencies, all while maintaining complete secrecy from the compromised elements within the government. Air traffic control reports normal holiday traffic over the capital, Agent Chen announced from her position at the communications console. The Pentagon ceremony is proceeding as scheduled. James climbed into the cockpit. the familiar routine of strapping himself into the ejection seat, bringing back memories of countless missions during his Air Force career. But this was different. This time, he was not representing his country in an official capacity. He was fighting to save it as a civilian who had already sacrificed everything for his principles. "Tower, this is Falcon 7 requesting clearance for departure." James spoke into his radio, using the call sign they had established for the operation. "Falcon 7, you are cleared for immediate takeoff. Proceed to intercept coordinates as briefed. Good hunting." The F-16 roared to life beneath him, and James felt the familiar surge of power as he guided the aircraft down the runway and into the clear July afternoon sky. Below him, the Maryland countryside spread out in a patchwork of green fields and suburban developments, peaceful and unaware of the drama unfolding overhead. "Falcon 7, this is Control," Emma's voice came through his headset. "Target aircraft is maintaining course toward Washington. Current speed 250 knots, altitude 8,000 feet. James banked the F-16 toward the intercept coordinates, his mind automatically calculating angles and timing. The terrorist aircraft was following a flight path that would bring it over the Pentagon at exactly 2:15, when the Independence Day ceremony would be at its peak attendance. "Control, I have visual contact with target aircraft," James reported as the Cessna Citation came into view ahead of him. The modified business jet appeared normal from a distance, but James could see the telltale signs of the modifications that had been made to accommodate its deadly cargo. "Falcon 7, you are authorized to begin intercept procedures." Hayes's voice came through the command channel. "Remember, we need that aircraft intact for evidence." James moved into position behind and slightly above the target aircraft, close enough to see into the cockpit where two men sat, with the focused intensity of people committed to their deadly mission. He activated the electronic warfare package that Rivera had installed, sending targeted electromagnetic pulses designed to disrupt the Citation's navigation and communication systems. The effect was immediate. The terrorist aircraft began to waver in its flight path as its electronic systems were compromised. James could see the pilots struggling with their controls, trying to maintain course toward their target. "Control, electronic countermeasures are effective. Target aircraft is experiencing navigation difficulties. Falcon 7, be advised that target aircraft is now 15 minutes from Pentagon airspace," Emma reported. "Local air traffic control is beginning to notice the irregular flight pattern." James moved closer to the Citation, positioning his aircraft where the terrorist pilots could clearly see him. He activated his radio on the emergency frequency, hoping to establish communication with the aircraft. "Citation November 74 Alpha. This is intercepting aircraft. You are ordered to divert immediately to Andrews Air Force Base for emergency landing." There was no response from the terrorist aircraft, but James could see increased activity in the cockpit as the pilots realized they were being intercepted. The Citation suddenly banked hard to the left, attempting to evade James's F-16 and continue toward Washington. "Control, target aircraft is attempting evasive maneuvers. They are not responding to radio contact. Falcon 7, you are authorized to use all necessary force to prevent that aircraft from reaching the Pentagon," Hayes ordered. James increased power and moved to intercept the Citation's new course, using his superior speed and maneuverability to stay with the terrorist aircraft. The chase was taking them directly over the suburbs of Northern Virginia, where thousands of families were enjoying 4th of July barbecues and celebrations, completely unaware of the life-and-death drama playing out overhead. "Control, I'm going to try to force them down using close formation pressure," James announced as he moved his F-16 to within 50 feet of the Citation's wing. The technique was dangerous but effective. By flying in extremely close formation, he could create aerodynamic disturbances that would make it difficult for the terrorist pilots to maintain control. The Citation's pilots were skilled, but they were flying an overloaded aircraft with compromised electronics against one of the most advanced fighter aircraft ever built. James could see their desperation as they tried various maneuvers to shake him off, but the F-16's superior performance allowed him to match every move they made. "Falcon 7, target aircraft is now 10 minutes from Pentagon airspace," Emma reported, her voice tight with tension. "If they reach the restricted zone, the Air Force will have to scramble official interceptors." James knew that official military intervention would expose the entire operation and potentially compromise the investigation into the conspiracy. He had to end this before the situation escalated beyond their control. Moving his F-16 directly in front of the citation, James activated the final component of Rivera's modifications, a high-powered strobe light system designed to disorient the terrorist pilots. The intense flashing lights filled the citation's cockpit, making it nearly impossible for the pilots to see their instruments or maintain visual reference. The effect was dramatic. The citation immediately began to lose altitude as the pilots struggled with their compromised vision and damaged electronics. James could see them fighting to regain control, but the combination of electronic warfare and visual disruption had overwhelmed their ability to fly the aircraft effectively. Control, target aircraft is going down. They're attempting an emergency landing in the field complex south of Alexandria. James followed the citation down, ready to provide assistance if the landing went badly. The terrorist aircraft touched down hard in an open field, bouncing twice before coming to rest against a line of trees. Emergency vehicles were already racing toward the crash site, alerted by the coordinated effort between Hayes's team and loyal elements within local law enforcement. "Falcon 7, excellent work," Hayes's voice came through the radio. "Return to base immediately. We'll handle the cleanup from here." As James banked his F-16 away from the crash site and headed back toward the private airfield, he could see smoke rising from the Pentagon in the distance, not from an attack but from the ceremonial fireworks that were part of the Independence Day celebration. Thousands of military personnel and their families were continuing their holiday festivities, completely unaware that they had just been saved from a catastrophic terrorist attack. "Control, this is Falcon 7 returning to base," James reported. "Mission accomplished." Emma's voice came through his headset, filled with emotion that she was trying to keep professional. "Welcome home, James. You just saved thousands of lives." As the F-16 descended toward the private airfield, where Rivera was waiting to service the aircraft, James felt a profound sense of completion. For the first time since his court-martial, he had been able to use his skills as a pilot in service of something greater than himself. The conspiracy was exposed, the attack had been prevented, and justice would finally be served. His father would have been proud. The secure briefing room deep within the Pentagon was a place James Mitchell never thought he would see again. 1 week had passed since the interception of the terrorist aircraft, and the investigation that followed had unraveled the Broken Eagle conspiracy with devastating thoroughness. Colonel Stone and 17 other military officers were now in federal custody, their network of betrayal exposed through the evidence recovered from the crashed citation and the comprehensive intelligence gathered by Hayes's team. James stood at attention before a panel of senior military officers, including General Patricia Morrison, who had been hastily promoted to replace the murdered General Hawkins. The room was filled with personnel he recognized from his years of service, but the atmosphere was unlike anything he had experienced during his court-martial 8 months earlier. "Captain Mitchell," General Morrison began, her voice carrying the weight of institutional authority, tempered by genuine respect. "The events of the past week have revealed not only a conspiracy against our national security, but also a grave injustice done to an officer who exemplified the highest values of military service." Director Hayes sat at the side of the room, along with Emma Rodriguez and Major Chen, their presence serving as a reminder of the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them all together. Master Sergeant Rivera stood near the back, his weathered face beaming with pride, as he watched his friend receive the recognition that had been so long denied. "The investigation into Operation Broken Eagle has confirmed that your original court-martial was the result of compromised testimony and deliberate manipulation by officers who were working against American interests," General Morrison continued. "Colonel Stone has provided full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence, and his testimony has revealed the extent to which your case was used to demonstrate his loyalty to foreign handlers." James felt a mixture of vindication and sadness as he listened to the general's words. The validation of his actions was gratifying, but it came at the cost of learning that the institution he had served so faithfully had been corrupted by men who had sold their honor for money and fear. "Therefore, by the authority vested in me by the Secretary of Defense, and with the full approval of the President of the United States, I hereby restore you to active duty with the rank of Major, effective immediately." The ceremony that followed was both deeply personal and profoundly meaningful. James's new rank insignia was pinned to his uniform by General Morrison herself, while the Silver Star was presented by Director Hayes in recognition of his extraordinary heroism in preventing the terrorist attack. The medal felt heavier than James had expected, weighted not just by its physical presence, but by the knowledge of what it represented. "Major Mitchell," General Morrison said as the formal ceremony concluded, "I have been authorized to offer you command of a new unit that will be established in response to the lessons learned from the Broken Eagle conspiracy. The Domestic Security Aviation Unit will be tasked with preventing future attempts to use aircraft as weapons against American targets." James considered the offer carefully. The new position would allow him to use his skills and experience in service of national security while working to prevent the kind of betrayal that had nearly succeeded in devastating the Pentagon. It was an opportunity to turn his personal ordeal into something that could protect others. "I accept the assignment, General," James replied. "When do I begin?" "Immediately," General Morrison smiled. "Your first task will be to establish protocols and training procedures that will make it impossible for future conspiracies to penetrate our security systems. You'll have full authority to recruit personnel and establish operational procedures." As the briefing concluded and the assembled officers began to disperse, Emma approached James with an expression that mixed professional satisfaction with personal warmth. Her own career had been transformed by the successful operation, and she had been promoted to Deputy Director of Counterintelligence at the CIA. "Congratulations, Major," she said, extending her hand. "You've earned every bit of recognition you're receiving." "We all did," James replied. "This was a team effort from beginning to end." Emma nodded, but her expression grew more serious. "There's something else you should know. The investigation has revealed that the Broken Eagle conspiracy was just one part of a larger network of foreign influence operations. Your new unit is going to be very busy." James had expected as much. The sophistication and scope of the conspiracy they had uncovered suggested that it was part of a broader campaign to undermine American military capabilities. The work ahead would be challenging and dangerous, but it was exactly the kind of mission that gave his life meaning and purpose. Master Sergeant Rivera approached as Emma moved away to speak with Director Hayes. The veteran mechanic's eyes were bright, with unshed tears, as he looked at his friend's restored rank insignia. "Your father would be so proud, Major," Rivera said, his voice thick with emotion. "He always knew you were destined for something special." James thought about the photograph that still sat on his mantelpiece in Alexandria. The image of his father standing beside his F-16 with the confident smile of a man who knew his place in the world. For the first time in months, James felt that same sense of belonging and purpose. "Carlos, I'm going to need good people for this new unit," James said. "People I can trust completely. Are you interested in a transfer?" Rivera's grin was answer enough. "Just try to keep me away, sir." As James left the Pentagon that evening, walking across the same parking lot where terrorists had planned to create devastation and chaos, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 8 months ago, he had been a disgraced ex-pilot, living in a cramped apartment and struggling to find meaning in his civilian life. Tonight, he was a major in the United States Air Force with a critical mission and the resources to accomplish it. The path had been painful and uncertain, filled with moments of despair and self-doubt that had tested every aspect of his character. But it had also revealed truths about courage, loyalty, and sacrifice that he never could have learned in the structured environment of normal military service. Sometimes, James realized, a person had to lose everything in order to discover what they were truly capable of becoming. His phone buzzed with a text message from Mrs. Chen, his elderly neighbor in Alexandria. "Saw the news about your promotion on television. I always knew you were special. Dinner is at 6 if you're interested." James smiled as he typed his response. "I'll be there. Thank you for everything." As he drove through the Virginia countryside toward his apartment, James passed the field where he had forced down the terrorist aircraft 1 week earlier. The site had been cleared of debris, and there was no visible sign of the drama that had unfolded there. But James would never forget the moment when he had realized that his exile from the Air Force had not been an ending. It had been preparation for the most important mission of his life. The road ahead stretched into the gathering dusk, illuminated by the headlights of his car, and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to serve something greater than himself. For the first time since landing his F-16 in a Maryland cornfield to save a stranger's life, Major James Mitchell was exactly where he belonged. His father's legacy lived on, not in the uniform or the rank, but in the unwavering commitment to do what was right, regardless of the personal cost. That legacy would guide him through whatever battles lay ahead, in the skies above America and in the shadows where ordinary people made extraordinary sacrifices to protect the innocent. The redemption was complete, but the mission was just beginning. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Joint Base Andrews as Colonel James Mitchell completed his inspection of the newest addition to the Domestic Security Aviation Unit. The sleek F-35 Lightning II represented the cutting edge of American military technology, its stealth capabilities, and advanced electronics making it the perfect platform for the counter-terrorism missions that had become his specialty over the past 7 years. The unit James had built from nothing now comprised 47 aircraft and over 200 personnel, all dedicated to preventing the kind of domestic aviation threats that had nearly succeeded in devastating the Pentagon. In those 7 years, they had intercepted 12 potential terrorist attacks, exposed 3 additional foreign influence operations, and established protocols that had been adopted by military installations worldwide. Master Sergeant Carlos Rivera, now bearing the stripes of a Chief Master Sergeant, approached with the satisfied expression of a craftsman who had spent decades perfecting his art. At 58, Rivera showed no signs of slowing down, his dedication to maintaining the unit's aircraft, matched only by his loyalty to the man who had given him the opportunity to serve at the highest levels of military aviation. "She's ready for the demonstration flight, Colonel," Rivera reported, handing James the maintenance log. "All systems are operating at peak efficiency." Today marked a special occasion, the 7th anniversary of the Broken Eagle conspiracy's exposure, and James had been invited to address a gathering of senior military officers about the lessons learned from that experience. The demonstration flight would showcase the capabilities of his unit, while serving as a reminder of the vigilance required to protect American military installations from domestic threats. Emma Rodriguez, now Director of Counterintelligence at the CIA, stood near the control tower with a small group of VIPs who had come to observe the demonstration. At 42, she had become one of the most respected intelligence professionals in the government, her success built on the foundation of trust and competence established during the Broken Eagle investigation. She caught James's eye and nodded with the quiet confidence of someone who had shared extraordinary experiences and emerged stronger for them. The years had been kind to both of them, professionally and personally. Emma had married a fellow CIA officer and had 2 children, while James had found love with Dr. Sarah Chen, a military physician who understood the demands of service and the importance of the mission. They had been married for 3 years, their relationship built on mutual respect and shared values that had been tested in the crucible of national security work. As James climbed into the cockpit of the F-35, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. The path from disgraced ex-pilot to unit commander had been neither straight nor easy, but every challenge had contributed to his growth as both an officer and a human being. The months of exile and despair had taught him humility and resilience, while the Broken Eagle operation had revealed the true meaning of service and sacrifice. "Tower, this is Eagle 1 requesting clearance for demonstration flight," James spoke into his radio, using the call sign that had become synonymous with his unit's mission. "Eagle 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Proceed to demonstration area as briefed." The F-35 lifted off smoothly, its advanced fly-by-wire controls responding to James's touch with precision that still amazed him after years of flying the aircraft. Below him, the familiar landscape of the Washington metropolitan area spread out like a detailed map, peaceful and secure thanks in part to the vigilance of people like those gathered at Andrews to witness today's demonstration. The flight profile included a series of intercept scenarios designed to showcase the unit's capabilities in responding to various types of aviation threats. James executed each maneuver with the precision that had made him one of the Air Force's most respected pilots, but his mind was also focused on the broader implications of what they were demonstrating. "Eagle 1, this is Control," came the voice of Major Lisa Park, who had joined the unit 2 years earlier and now served as James's deputy commander. "All demonstration objectives completed successfully. You are cleared to return to base." As James guided the F-35 back toward Andrews, he reflected on the cost of the vigilance they maintained. Colonel Stone had served 4 years in federal prison before dying of a heart attack, his family destroyed by the shame of his betrayal. 17 other officers had received sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years, their careers and reputations ruined by their decision to put personal gain above national loyalty. The broader investigation had revealed that the Broken Eagle conspiracy was indeed part of a larger network of foreign influence operations, leading to reforms in security protocols and counterintelligence procedures that had strengthened American defenses against similar threats. But the price of that knowledge had been paid in broken lives and shattered trust that would take generations to fully repair. After landing and completing his post-flight procedures, James joined the gathering of senior officers for the formal presentation. General Morrison, now chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, introduced him with words that still carried the weight of institutional recognition for his extraordinary service. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Mitchell's unit represents one of our most successful adaptations to the evolving threats facing American military installations. The lessons learned from the Broken Eagle conspiracy have been incorporated into training and operational procedures throughout our armed forces. James's presentation focused on the importance of maintaining both technological superiority and moral clarity in the face of threats that sought to exploit weaknesses in both systems and personnel. He spoke about the need for constant vigilance without paranoia and the importance of creating environments where service members felt comfortable reporting suspicious activities without fear of retaliation. The greatest threat to our national security, James concluded, is not any particular weapon or tactic, but the erosion of the values that make our military worth defending. Honor, integrity, and service before self are not just words on a wall. They are the foundation of everything we do. After the formal presentation, James found himself standing with Emma and Director Hayes, who had traveled from Langley to attend the anniversary commemoration. Hayes, now in his 70s but still sharp and engaged, had become something of a mentor to James over the years. "So you've built something remarkable here, James," Hayes observed, watching the unit's personnel conduct their daily operations with quiet professionalism. "Your father would be proud of what you've accomplished." James nodded, thinking about the photograph that still sat on his desk in his office, the same image of his father that had sustained him through the darkest moments of his exile and disgrace. "I hope so, sir. I've tried to honor the values he taught me." Emma smiled with the warmth of someone who had shared extraordinary experiences and remained a trusted friend. "You've done more than honor them, James. You've proven that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you're truly capable of becoming." As the day's events concluded and the VIPs departed, James walked across the tarmac toward his office, reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The young captain who had landed his F-16 in a Maryland cornfield to save a stranger's life seemed like a different person now, shaped by experiences that had tested every aspect of his character and emerged stronger for the trials. The unit he commanded was more than just a military organization. It was a testament to the power of redemption and the possibility of turning personal tragedy into public service. Every successful mission, every threat neutralized, every life saved, was a vindication of the choice he had made 7 years earlier to follow his conscience rather than his orders. The sun was setting over the Virginia countryside as James reached his office, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that reminded him of the storm clouds that had changed his life forever. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to serve, but tonight he would go home to Sarah and the life they had built together, grounded in the knowledge that he was exactly where he belonged. The redemption was complete, but the mission would continue as long as there were people willing to sacrifice everything to protect the innocent and defend the values that made sacrifice worthwhile. In the end, James realized that was the true meaning of service, not the uniform or the rank or the recognition, but the willingness to stand between the darkness and the light, no matter what it cost. His father's legacy lived on, not in memory but in action, in the daily choice to do what was right regardless of the personal consequences. That legacy would guide him through whatever battles lay ahead, in the skies above America, and in the hearts of those who understood that freedom was not free, but was purchased with the courage of ordinary people who chose to do extraordinary things. The circle was complete, but the story would continue as long as there were those willing to write it with their lives. As we reach the end of Major James Mitchell's extraordinary journey, we're reminded that true heroism isn't found in the absence of fear, but in the courage to act despite it. From that stormy morning in Maryland, when a young Air Force captain chose to save a life over following orders, to the moment 7 years later, when Colonel Mitchell stood as the leader of an elite unit protecting our nation's skies, we've witnessed the transformative power of unwavering moral conviction. James's story teaches us that sometimes our greatest defeats become the foundation for our most meaningful victories. His court-martial and disgrace, devastating as they were, prepared him for a mission that required someone who understood both the cost of doing right and the price of institutional betrayal. The months of exile and despair weren't punishment. They were preparation for the moment when his country would need someone who had already sacrificed everything for principle. The Broken Eagle conspiracy revealed a sobering truth about the eternal vigilance required to protect our freedoms. Evil doesn't always announce itself with foreign accents or obvious threats. Sometimes it wears familiar uniforms and speaks with trusted voices, exploiting our weaknesses from within. But James's story also proves that integrity, once tested in the fires of adversity, becomes an unbreakable foundation for extraordinary service. Emma Rodriguez's journey from a desperate woman trapped in floodwaters to the director of counterintelligence reminds us that we never know how our acts of kindness might ripple through time. The life James saved became instrumental in saving thousands of others, proving that compassion is never wasted, even when its impact isn't immediately visible. Master Sergeant Rivera's unwavering loyalty demonstrates that true friendship isn't measured by convenience, but by the willingness to stand with someone when the whole world seems against them. His faith in James never wavered, even when James had lost faith in himself. Perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that redemption is always possible for those willing to pay its price. James didn't earn his restoration through political maneuvering or legal technicalities. He earned it by continuing to serve his country's highest ideals, even when his country had seemingly abandoned him. The values that guided James, honor, integrity, service before self, aren't relics of a bygone era. They're timeless principles that remain as relevant today as they were when his father first taught them to a young boy dreaming of flight. In our complex modern world, where moral clarity can seem elusive and doing the right thing often comes at great personal cost, James Mitchell's story stands as a beacon of hope. Your thoughts matter to us. This story was crafted to honor the men and women who serve our nation with distinction, often at great personal sacrifice. If this tale of courage, redemption, and unwavering principle resonated with you, we'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Share with us. Where are you watching from today? What military stories or acts of heroism have inspired you in your own life? And if you stayed with us through this entire journey of honor and redemption, type Eagle in the comments. It helps us know who appreciates these deeper stories of courage and helps us continue bringing you narratives that celebrate the best of human nature. Don't miss our other inspiring military stories. Check out the suggested videos on your screen for more tales of heroism, sacrifice, and the extraordinary courage of ordinary people who chose to serve something greater than themselves. Each story reminds us that freedom isn't free. It's purchased with the dedication of those willing to pay its price. Remember, in a world that often celebrates the loudest voices, true heroes are usually the quiet ones who simply do what's right, regardless of who's watching or what it costs them. Be like James Mitchell. Be like the heroes who serve in silence. Be someone who chooses honor over convenience, principle over popularity, and service over self. The sky is calling. Will you answer?